All right. Hello and welcome, welcome everybody to this beautiful occasion. It's another IEL Online forum. And today it's a real pleasure of mine to introduce today's guest, who is Associate Professor Celeste Rodríguez Louro, who is the winner of the 2025 IEL Linguistics Outreach Prize. Celeste is Chair of Linguistics and Director of the Language Lab at the University of Western Australia, where she also serves as Deputy Chair of the Generative AI think tank. She's an Australian English and Aboriginal English consultant for the Oxford English Dictionary, and she will soon take up a visiting research fellowship at All Souls College at the University of Oxford during Hilary Term 2026, if I get it right. What made Celeste win is that her outreach really exemplifies how scholarship can really have extraordinary public impact. So she really took linguistics out of the ivory tower. So that was really fantastic to read through her projects. She founded the Language Lab, which is part of her application in 2022 to make linguistics more inclusive, accessible, and socially relevant. And the initiative has since raised more than 3 million Australian dollars for projects promoting innovation, diversity, and inclusion. So really amazing work. Her projects have reached tens of millions of people globally, and these projects include challenging misconceptions about Aboriginal English, notably through Celeste's co-authored Outreach in the Conversation, as well as collaborations with Indigenous linguist Glenys Collard. Also creating culturally safe medical media in Aboriginal English with the Heart Foundation, which has been viewed more than 18,000 times. She's leading the Aboriginal English Voices project, a groundbreaking partnership with Google to make voice-operated technology more inclusive, a project that has reached an astounding almost 75 million readers within its first month. And of course, she's been presenting the Language Lab on RTR-FM, an award-winning community radio program that has earned her the 2023 Talkley Award from the Australian Linguistic Society, the ALS. So across these initiatives, Celeste has really combined linguistic expertise with public engagement using media, technology, and education to challenge linguistic prejudice and promote inclusion. So it's a real pleasure, and I'm really happy that Celeste took the time to talk to us today about her outreach initiatives. And after her presentation, we'll have some time to ask her questions about how she's so successful and manages to combine linguistics and spread the word beyond the ivory tower. So thanks so much, Celeste. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I mean, how wonderful. I wanted to say before I get started today, firstly, can everyone hear me well? Okay, good. I wanted to say thank you so much to IEL, to Martin, to Claire, to everyone I've been in touch with since I found out I had won this wonderful award. I have to say, I've been feeling really celebrated and made to feel really special about my achievements. And I think that's a wonderful collegiality that should be celebrated. I also felt there were many different instances for me to feel celebrated and special, including a video I was able to send through to IEL, to the IEL conference, where Madeline Clues, who's in attendance here, very nicely introduced it and also celebrated me, the monetary prize that comes with it, the opportunity to talk to all of you today. So thank you. Thank you very, very much. I think for me, this collegiality means a lot. It really just makes the work so worthwhile, and it sets a really wonderful precedent for what healthy interactions in academia should be like. So I think that's something that IEL should be really, really pleased to be able to offer. I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge country with a capital C. I know that many of you are joining from places outside of Australia. In Australia, it is customary to acknowledge Indigenous country, and country with a C rather than country the way we usually use the word country, because that term includes not only the land on which we stand, but also waterways, oceans, and skies. And I wanted to share with you this photo of me on the right, standing with Dr. Glenys Collard. Glenys Collard is my Indigenous collaborator and someone I've been working with very, very closely for the last decade. And so would like to pay my respects to the Whadjuk Noongar people. That's the country I am connecting from. And if there are any other Indigenous countries or people represented here today, I'd like to pay my respects as well. Thank you very much. And so the work that I'm going to be describing for you took place in southwest Western Australia. That's where Whadjuk Noongar country is located. You can see it here on the map. And some of you may also notice some wonderful beach and ocean. That's the southwest, even sort of south to where I am at the moment. Places like Margaret River and so on. It's not Whadjuk Noongar country, but it's still Noongar country more generally. Wonderful, wonderful place, and hope that some of you get to visit us one day. So I wanted to share with you kind of the philosophical underpinnings of where I come from when I do anything really, as it pertains to my work, but also and very specifically as it relates to outreach. So here's a picture of my door. It doesn't look very glamorous when you take a picture of it, but I wanted to show you that that photo I shared with you and a paper that came out in Journal of Sociolinguistics in 2021 kind of shown here as something that I'm particularly proud of, this working together with my Indigenous collaborator, Glenys Collard. I'll tell you a bit more about it in a moment. But something else you can see here on the left is a quote attributed to this wonderful person, Toni Morrison. And she, here you can see, she said, I tell my students, when you get these jobs they have been so brilliantly trained for, just remember that your real job is that if you are free, you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else. And that's always seemed to me as such a powerful way to think about ourselves and about our privilege. After all, being highly educated and having a job in academia, a stable job, if we are lucky to have those, is a real privilege. And that's where I'm coming from with my outreach, just to share with you sort of the philosophical underpinnings of what I do. I also wanted to just give you a little bit about my positionality. This is before we get started on Martin's questions. Martin has some questions for me. But I wanted to share with you my positionality because when you hear about all the outreach work that I've been able to do, you may think to yourself, well, how is it possible? How can someone teach, do research, and have such an active outreach agenda? And I want to share with you that a lot of this work actually took place while I was engaged in very much research intensive work. So this has not always been the case. I mean, at the very beginning, 20 years ago, when we arrived in Australia, we knew absolutely no one, had no contacts, slowly began to make contacts in academia, especially through linguistics. I did my Australian PhD at the University of Melbourne, started to get to know people and feel a bit more at home and get more of a sense for what this country is like and what kinds of expectations you may find in academia. Australia, I think, is quite distinct from Europe. Eventually, I landed a teaching and research job, initially on a 5-year contract, and that job was made permanent in 2016. At that time, I was also awarded an Australian Research Council fellowship, and that's when I became research intensive. So I want to share this with you so that you kind of get a sense for the context, both my philosophical kind of positioning with this work and trying to understand that my privilege can open doors for others as well, but also that I had the bandwidth to actually sit down and think, okay, how can I socialize my research and engage in this kind of work? I think Martin had some questions on my what Martin was calling my outreach vision. I'm not sure, Martin, whether you want to ask your questions or.
If you let me, I'm more than happy to ask you questions.
Yeah, good.
So the first thing that basically came to mind that I think would be interesting for many people who view this either live or later in the recording would be to get an understanding of what motivated you initially. Like most of the researchers, when we do research, we focus on our projects, we write papers, but we don't think as much, or we didn't used to think that much about outreach to the wider public. So what was really the aspect that really made you that motivated you to engage in public outreach?
That's such a brilliant question. I guess the number one reason is that I've never actually understood how a discipline like linguistics, whose object of study is language, the one thing that defines us as human beings and separates us from the rest of the species that we share the planet with, remains such an obscure discipline. For a very long time, you would say to people, I'm a professor of linguistics or I teach in linguistics, and they'll ask you, as you know, how many languages do you speak? But many people don't even know necessarily what it is. They assume that you teach a foreign language. At least that's the assumption I get, particularly because of my accent and my looks. They'll say, oh, okay, so what languages do you teach? And so it started to really bug me that every time I told people what I do for a living, I had to explain what the discipline entails. And so that became my mission in a way, yeah, to kind of dispel sort of obscurity, sort out obscurity around what linguistics is. And I think if I kind of think back to 2011, which is when I joined the University of Western Australia as a level B academic. A level B academic is an assistant professor. At that time, I was doing so much teaching. I was teaching day and night practically, and my students seemed to be really excited about linguistics, and I could see how my teaching and the content that I had to share with them was exciting for them. So I started to think, hey, how come lay people out there are not feeling the same way, are so confused as to what it is that we do? And so it started kind of little by little. I guess at the time, and again, when you're teaching so much, you have very little time to do anything else. And the way I protected my employment and my people, the people who've been able to grow with me in the discipline, was to favor my work on my research. So I think outreach, I would say, the way I see outreach is not as you'll sit down and plan your outreach in a really organized way, strategically the same way you plan maybe your research if you're able to. For me, outreach is like an offshoot of the research that I'm working on. But it became really quite important to do when I started to work with a speaker of a minoritized variety of English that is, thought of as being broken, as being less than, and as a diverse individual, as a migrant to Australia, I also became really kind of acutely aware of how ignorant of diversity people can be. So if you're sitting around a table and decisions are being made, maybe not so much now, but 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the mainstream, there's an assumption, a baseline, an assumption that is made on a monolingual, monocultural, non-ethnic, mainstream person. And that began to really worry me. And when I joined the culturally and linguistically diverse working group, there are things that I don't even talk about. I've done so much that, some stuff is kind of like not for me, but for public, in the way that I presented my application to you guys for this wonderful award. These are not things I talk about, but that's why it's wonderful to have this opportunity to actually expand. So when I was a member of the culturally and linguistically diverse working group here at UWA, I noticed that for a lot of migrants, they had come to accept that diversity is like a party. It's like, okay, let's come to work dressed in our traditional clothing and let's make some food from the places we come from, and that's how we celebrate it. And I said to someone, diversity is not a party, it's a fight. You know, it's a fight for equity. It's a fight for seeing diversity as mainstream, that we are a diverse country. People come from different parts of the world. They sound differently when they speak and so on. So slowly it became my mission. And that's where Language Lab had an opportunity to start a lab. And when I was thinking about this one-liner that will kind of describe what the lab does and what we are all about, I thought, well, it's about becoming a diversity champion. Whether you are diversifying the way that you do your research, in that you're looking at different types of evidence, whether you are working with people from minoritized contexts, whether you make it intentional to cite work by non-mainstream, non-white, non-male populations, not to discriminate anyone, but whether you become aware of how entrenched your research is in a given Western paradigm. That's not the be-all, end-all. And so then this ties into decolonization as well, which I don't think I have time to go into, but it's decolonization has really become a major research stream for me, and that's what I'm going to be working on mostly at Oxford. So this idea of all places, I mean, that's quite interesting, isn't it? But decolonization as a way to challenge the status quo when it comes to access and equity, so that people have access to privileges that are very difficult for them to actually get to because of the frameworks that they work in, the languages or the varieties that they speak, for us in linguistics, but also different ways of knowing, being, and doing in the world. So that's when it became more of a mission, not so much a planning ahead, but how can I deal with a present problem? I should also say this, as an Argentinian speaker of Spanish, I grew up, and I think this is extremely important context. I grew up in an educational system that would teach us Spanish from Madrid. And when we wanted to, as children, we'd ask questions around the pronouns. You know, the pronominal system is different in Argentina and the sound system's different. We would again be taken back to, well, but the actual Spanish that you want to learn is this Madrid version. To me, that made no sense. I felt excluded. I felt as though there was a sense of linguistic insecurity instilled in children. And then that coupled with the way that history was taught, particularly the mistreatment, the killing, and the dispossession of the indigenous people of the Americas, that to me was unbearable as a child. So I actually now, with wisdom, I don't want to say with aging, with wisdom, I realize that this mission actually dates back to whatever was happening in this classroom I was attending in 1992. So I hope that is not too vague, but it's kind of the nuance that I'm unable to present in a submission to you guys, where I'm quoting all these beautiful numbers and all the people who are reading my work. But today I'm trying to share more about who I am and where that kind of impetus comes from.
Great, and it makes perfect sense. But I'd like to jump ahead a little bit and just ask you, like, when you started your Language Lab radio program, obviously it was a great success, right? But first of all, how did it start? How did you initiate it? And what have you learned about reaching and sustaining such a great audience with linguistic topics?
Yes, thank you so much. Now, remember I was talking about when I was more junior and was doing a lot of teaching. If we kind of fast forward from 2011 to around 2020, 2021, so I am a mid-career researcher. I am now research intensive, and this opportunity comes along to sort of make an appearance on community radio between 10 15 minutes, have a little corner. And at the time I think they wanted something on gender. I think that was the beginning in 2019. They wanted a little something on gender, and I took it on board. And I was at the beginning, it was more about language and gender, and I did maybe 10 episodes like that. And then slowly, once I had I guess, networked enough that they knew me and we were having fun and they enjoyed it. Slowly, I said, hey, how about a linguistics segment? How about actually just linguistics, not just gender? And they said, yeah, absolutely. So it was a new year. It was around, I think it was 2021, 2022. And you can see here, for example, that this particular episode that I screen captured here for you was on the subfields of linguistics. I mean, that is a pretty technical. It's not obviously presented in a way that people relate to it, but the way that I think people, what really worked for Language Lab on radio, and we stopped, I stopped working on it at the end of 24, so it's been a while now. But what really, what made it really successful is that I was there every single week. So I had a dedicated segment every Tuesday, every Wednesday. The day kept moving, but I was there every single week. And when it became quite established, I also brought along some interns. We've got some really exciting linguistics internships in our program. So these interns were helping me sort of script the questions that we would send through to the radio for the radio to then interview me. And then I also brought along some early career researchers for them to kind of hone in their skills. So we had people like Dr. Amanda Hamilton. I think we've had Dr. Jess Crook as well. And we had my PhD students at the time. So Madeline Clues, one of them, Lucia Freyes, and so on. So again, for every project, I guess, and this is a recipe for success, I would say. Number one, networking, and just showing up consistently so that people can rely on you. So they needed content, the radio programmers needed content for 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes once a week. And you need to show up. And you need to show up prepared. And we were having fun. I loved it, actually. It was so nice. And then once you've got those networks in place, it can grow in any way that you're able for it to grow. For me, because I became more and more senior and eventually was promoted to associate professor and so on, I had just so much on my plate that I wouldn't have been able to maintain it, to show up weekly in the way that I think one needs to show up for these kinds of things to kind of keep momentum. And so eventually we wrapped it up. But I was recently talking to Level C, a senior lecturer here at here in the School of Social Sciences, and they were asking me, "How did you do it? Would you recommend I do it? It's a different discipline." I said, "Yeah, absolutely. If you enjoy public speaking, it's such a wonderful opportunity for people to, again, to get to know, okay, what's linguistics? How is it useful? And so on." So very enjoyable. And then I was lucky to be awarded the 2023 Talkley Award by the Australian Linguistic Society. So that was quite nice as well to have that recognition from our society here in Australia.
That's super fascinating. I was just thinking, like when I think about the audience, and I know that there are different experiences in different countries. Did you get help from the university to make contacts to the radio show? Were you called directly? Like, how exactly did that work out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the initial contact with the radio did come through my university, yes. So I think, if this is something people want to do, if people really want to do outreach, or at least have some kind of strand of outreach, some sort of activity that ticks the outreach box, keep an eye out for all sorts of emails that the university will centrally send to different academics, and see if you could in any way contribute. You also need to be quite creative. I think creativity has really been my guiding force, as well, because sometimes it looks like they want a single thing that you maybe think I'm not going to be able to offer. But then if you reach out to them and say, look, this is what I do, and this is what I'm thinking, they'll work with you. So I think as academics, unfortunately, there's, as with anything in life, there's like good aspects of it and really kind of detrimental ones. The good thing about being an academic is that you will show up, you will do a good job, you will do your reading, you will work that depth that is sometimes missing from other parts of society that are not academia. What I see as a negative for us is that we are can be, especially in linguistics, very structured and very taking things at face value, that, okay, this is what's on offer. And there's no way that I can do things differently. And there's always, in my opinion, room for negotiation. So you just need to make yourself visible to some extent. And if it's not right now, down the line, there may be an opportunity that you can contribute to. So yeah, the university was super helpful in making this available, but I don't want it to make it sound like these kinds of opportunities were coming my way weekly. This was a one-off. So you kind of need to be really attentive for when these kinds of things come your way. And if you're a senior academic and you're getting these kinds of offers, but for a fact you're not going to be able to take them on, and in your team you've got more junior people, you may want to reach out to them and maybe offer it to them. That's what I try to do. Although at some point you also need to know when to stop, because we're all very overworked. You don't want to send confusing message to people that I'm expecting you to take this on. So it's a fine balance.
No, that's great. Yeah, I think there's also a difference when I compare the situation here in Australia to, for example, Germany. I've colleagues from Germany here at the moment, and they actually contacted media outlets and asked, well, hey, would you be interested in, doing something with me? And they felt that the media outlets they were talking to were a lot more reserved. I think Australia's in a good place because people are quite open here to collaborate and provide content. But following,
But if I may quickly,
yeah, sure.
the other thing to remember is that we live in a global world. So
Yeah,
if you're
true.
in Germany, as long as you can command different languages, or even in German, but you contact ABC, some ABC radio, any kind of program that does, where you can actually present in German if you wanted to,
True.
just to be really open-minded, and do not take no for an answer. I posted something on my LinkedIn, I think a couple of days ago. Nobel Prize, latest Nobel Prize winner had a rejection from Nature, from the journal, Nature, and seemed like the end of the world back then. Eventually goes on to win a Nobel Prize. So I think it's important not to give up. And if you do see it as a mission, something that you really want to do, you will find an outlet. It may be a podcast. There are plenty of linguistics podcasts. I think, yeah, so be careful not to just take no for an answer, unless you've done it at least, 5, 6 times. See what kinds, try again, maybe at a later point in time. Yeah, you need to be very patient as well. Yeah, but you were saying you had a question, Martin. Sorry.
That was fantastic advice. Like I fully endorse it. It's really brilliant. Thanks so much. Um, Coming from IEL as a professional academic society, I was wondering if you could think about how IEL could support linguists who want to engage more with the public or build collaborations outside of the university? What could you think about how we can support people in a way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, the reality for us in Australia, I'm not sure what it's like in Europe or in the UK. I will soon find out when I spend time in the UK. But in Australia, the humanities and the social sciences are just for a lot of people, they're seen as a complete waste of time. So, they'll make fun of cultural studies and literature and even things like history, even philosophy. And when you're someone who has gone through the educational system, studying mostly has, this makes absolutely no sense. But you need to be empathetic and think about lay people. What do lay people need to hear from us? They don't want jargon. They don't want completely obscure and detailed analysis that may be interesting for us, but are completely uninteresting to them. So I think every academic, ideally, should be able to do the the intellectual work of actually sitting down and doing in-depth work on whatever it is you're looking at, that should be happening. But at the same time, we need to be able to have this sort of elevator pitch and a very kind of quick and easy explanation of what we're doing. I guess the way that, something that really drove it home very clearly for me was that when I was awarded the research fellowship through the Australian Research Council, that was federal funding. That money comes from taxpayers' funding. And I wanted, just from the moment you apply for that kind of fellowship, you're asked to write a national interest statement. They make it very clear to you, okay, how is this contributing? So for me, this was very clear that yes, of course, I'm publishing in Language Variation and Change and Journal of Sociolinguistics and writing a book for Cambridge University Press. Of course, I'm doing that. But what else am I doing so that the taxpayer can say, oh, yeah, those two women doing that work in Aboriginal English and using yarning to collect their data and working with the Heart Foundation. So for me, it was almost a given that this type of work needed to happen. So the reason I'm saying this is that you may be in a country or in a context where it's quite okay for people to do research on extremely specialized topics, and that may be your work. And there may not be an expectation that you will have this kind of outreach portfolio. So you need to kind of, I guess, understand the context. Here in Australia, as I said, the humanities and the social sciences are not necessarily celebrated, particularly in Western Australia. UWA has a relatively quite a small programs in the house, and STEM is much more favored. And so I see it as a personal challenge to try and see how far can I take this. And so when I'm now invited to contribute to roundtables and to government discussions and executive meetings on Gen AI, and they want a linguist in the room, a social scientist in the room, I take that as success. To me, that is success. That means that what I've been trying to say and communicate through publications, outreach, meeting people, and so on is working. And if I hadn't done any of that outreach, no one would be able to relate to my PhD thesis on the preterite and the present perfect in Argentinian Spanish. Like, why would they? Do you know what I mean? So it's a fine balance between those two. But the way I see outreach, and I would invite people think about it, is it's a way to socialize your work. If you are at dinner with your friends and your friends ask, okay, what do you do? And this has happened to me where I've said the word linguistics and pretty much there's no uptake, like very little. There have been one or two exceptions, and I've been very touched by those people who have wanted to engage. And so unless I am hanging out with the wrong people, you need to kind of ask yourself, whereas when I partnered up with Google and started to work with Glenys and started to do all this outreach, people could relate to it. So it's a matter of, okay, the ivory tower, but then what else is out there? And I think ISLE is doing amazingly. An outreach prize is a really great thing to have. Something else that I was thinking maybe we could incorporate more of during conferences, for example, there could be sessions on outreach, and I think have had these for quite a while here in Australia through the Australian Linguistic Society conference. So what are you working on? How did it happen? Google was slightly different case, if I may, very quickly, because it's not as though we reached out to Google to work with them or to have any kind of outreach. The outreach that we did, and you can see this is from the project launch in February this year. The way this happened was that through research with Glenys, Google reached out, and through academic networks, including people at LDACA and Professor Michael Hall and some other extremely collegial people who, again, celebrate the work, the research work that we're doing, that's how we got to work with them. So good quality work, good quality research, but networking that research, socializing it is important. Otherwise, there's just so much going on that it may just go completely unnoticed, as you know.
I'd love to ask a lot more questions, especially about your collaboration with Google, or also the effects of Aboriginal Englishes and how you've basically helped people make more inclusive AI. So I think it's fascinating. But for the sake of time, I'd just like to thank you here. I think it's been absolutely fascinating. So I'll end the recording and I'll open the floor for the attendees to ask questions. So thanks so much, Celeste. That was really great. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin.